The moment the front door clicked shut, my world shattered. I heard the car pull away from the driveway, the sound of my sister Brooke and her husband Mark heading toward the cruise terminal, and then there was nothing but silence. That deafening, suffocating silence that you only hear when something deeply wrong is about to unfold. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. I stood in my sister's kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, gripping the edge of the marble countertop, staring at the thermos that Brooke had placed in my hands just minutes before she left. It was white with silver accents, elegant and understated, exactly like everything else in my sister's meticulously curated life. Inside that thermos was supposedly chamomile tea with honey, a calming blend that Brooke had made specifically for my niece Nola. My beautiful, quiet niece who hadn't spoken a single word in 8 years. The tea was supposed to help her sleep better, Brooke had said, her voice smooth and reassuring like it always was. Just give her the tea around 7 o'clock, Lisa. It'll help her relax. She's been having trouble sleeping, and her therapist thinks chamomile would be beneficial. I remembered nodding, playing the role of the dutiful aunt who was thrilled to spend a long weekend babysitting. My sister had been so gracious about asking, so apologetic for the short notice. Their cruise had been booked months ago, a romantic getaway to celebrate their 15-year anniversary. How could I possibly say no? I had taken time off work at the architecture firm where I'd been working for the past 12 years, rearranged my schedule, and prepared myself for 3 days of caring for my sister's quiet, solemn daughter. I loved Nola with an intensity that sometimes surprised me. She had been born mute, her vocal cords forming improperly in utero, a condition that the doctors had said might be reversible with surgery, but Brooke had always been hesitant. She preferred to say that Nola wasn't broken, that she was simply different, that the world needed to accommodate her rather than her accommodating the world. It was one of the few things I genuinely respected about my sister, though respect was a complicated emotion when it came to Brooke. We had a history, the kind of sister history that involves petty jealousies, unresolved resentments, and the kind of love that exists despite everything else. She was 3 years younger than me, and she had always been the prettier one, the more successful one by society's standards. While I was grinding away at my job, building a respectable career, but nothing glamorous, Brooke had married well, had a beautiful home, and seemed to glide through life with an enviable grace. Our mother had always made comparisons, those small, cutting remarks that mothers sometimes make without even realizing their weapons. "Oh, Lisa, your sister just got promoted at the marketing firm. Isn't that wonderful? At her age, too." Or, "Brooke's house is just stunning. Did you see the renovations she had done?" These comments had built walls between us over the years, walls that we had tried to dissolve with forced family dinners and carefully neutral conversations. But underneath it all, there was something else. Something that I had never quite been able to articulate, a sense that Brooke was hiding something, that the perfect exterior masked something darker. It was the way she controlled every aspect of Nola's life, from what she ate to what she wore to when she was allowed to interact with me. It was the way she insisted on being present during our visits, monitoring our interactions, watching me like a hawk to ensure I wasn't filling Nola's head with dangerous ideas. And it was the way she had gradually isolated Nola from the rest of the family, claiming that Nola needed a quiet, controlled environment to thrive. So when she called me 3 weeks ago and asked if I could watch Nola while she and Mark went on the cruise, I was both excited and terrified. Excited because it meant uninterrupted time with my niece, time where I could actually talk to her, share things with her, let her be a normal 13-year-old kid instead of the silent, watchful person she seemed to be in her mother's presence. Terrified because I knew Brooke would find something to criticize, some way to suggest that I hadn't cared for Nola properly, that I had done something wrong. That was how my sister operated. She was the kind of person who could make you feel guilty for things that weren't your fault, who could twist situations to make herself the victim and everyone else the perpetrator. The thermos sat on the counter between us, a gleaming monument to my sister's careful control. I picked it up, felt its weight in my hand, and I was just about to ask Nola if she was thirsty when something extraordinary happened. Nola reached out and grabbed my wrist. It was a gentle grab, but firm, and her dark eyes that were exactly like our mother's, sharp and intelligent, were fixed on mine with an intensity that I had never seen before. She shook her head slowly, deliberately, and then she did something that made my heart stop completely. She opened her mouth, and she spoke. "Don't," she said, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper, as if it hadn't been used in years. Because it hadn't. "Don't drink the tea, Auntie Lisa. Please. Don't drink it." I stood frozen, the thermos still in my hand, and for a moment I couldn't process what I was hearing. This was my niece, the girl who communicated through iPad apps and careful hand gestures, whose silence had defined her existence for most of her life. This was the child who hadn't made a sound since she was 5 years old, who had never even tried to speak in front of anyone as far as I knew. And now she was speaking to me, her voice rough and broken but unmistakably real, and she was warning me about the tea. "I don't understand," I whispered, but even as I said it, my hands were shaking. I set the thermos down carefully on the counter, as if it might explode. "Nola, sweetheart, what do you mean? Your mother said this is chamomile tea to help you sleep." Nola shook her head again, more urgently this time. She pulled out her iPad with her other hand and started typing frantically, her fingers flying across the screen. When she showed me the message, her whole body was trembling. "Mom put something in it. Something bad. She's been giving me pills for months, Andy. Pills that make me feel weird and sad. I heard her on the phone with someone yesterday. She said she was going to give you the same thing. I don't know why, but I know it's wrong. I've been practicing speaking in secret. I had to tell you. I had to warn you." I read the words on the screen 3 times before they actually sank in. My sister Brooke, who was so perfect, so put together, so effortlessly superior in every way. My sister was apparently drugging her own child. And she had planned to drug me too. The kitchen suddenly felt very small, and the air felt very thick, and I couldn't quite catch my breath. This was the moment where everything changed, where the world tilted on its axis, and I had to confront the possibility that someone I had trusted, someone I had blood ties to, was capable of something truly monstrous. I looked at Nola, really looked at her for the first time in years, and I saw all the signs that I had somehow managed to miss. The way her eyes sometimes seemed distant and unfocused. The way she moved slowly, almost listlessly, through her days. The way she seemed to shrink into herself whenever her mother entered the room. All of it suddenly made sense in a horrifying way that made my stomach turn. "Nola," I said carefully, sitting down on one of the bar stools next to her, "I need you to tell me everything. I need to know exactly what your mother has been doing." And so she did. For the next 3 hours, while I made us hot chocolate and tried to process what I was hearing, my niece told me a story that seemed too dark, too impossible to be true. But the more she spoke, the more details she provided, the more her words aligned with things I had noticed over the years but hadn't consciously registered. She told me about the pills, small white tablets that Brooke had been giving her with her breakfast, claiming they were vitamins. She described the way they made her feel, the heaviness in her limbs, the fog that settled over her mind. She told me that she had started pretending to take them, spitting them out into tissues and hiding them in her room, because she had started to suspect something was wrong. She had found one of Brooke's old psychiatric textbooks in the study, and she had looked up the pills based on their markings. They were antipsychotics, medications meant for people with severe mental illnesses. Not for 13-year-old girls. Nola told me that she had overheard Brooke talking on the phone with a lawyer, discussing something called a conservatorship. Nola, with her careful listening and her sharp intelligence, had put the pieces together. Her mother was medicating her heavily, keeping her isolated and silent, and building a case to have herself appointed as her legal guardian with complete control over her life, her money, and her future. It was a slow-burn version of what legal experts called financial abuse through guardianship, a predatory practice that targeted vulnerable people, particularly children and the elderly. And Brooke had been planning it all along. But there was more.
There was the part about me.
Nola had heard Brooke and Mark arguing about whether my presence was a threat. Mark apparently didn't understand why Brooke was so concerned about me, why she kept warning him that I was trying to interfere in their family. Brooke had apparently told him that I was unstable, that I had a history of mental illness that I had hidden from everyone, that I was dangerous around children. None of this was true. I have never had mental health issues beyond the normal anxiety and sadness that comes with being a human being. I have never been hospitalized. I have never been diagnosed with anything. But Brooke had decided that in order to truly isolate Nola and justify her actions to the outside world, she needed to discredit me. She needed to make everyone believe that I was unstable, that I was the threat, not her. And the way to do that was to get me to consume medication without my knowledge. If she could get me to take those pills, to get them in my system, she could then claim that I was having some kind of breakdown during my time with Nola. She could point to my erratic behavior, my confusion, my potentially dangerous state of mind, and she could use it as justification for cutting off all contact between me and my niece. She could tell everyone that I had done something inappropriate, that I had exposed Nola to my illness, that I was exactly the kind of threat she had been warning everyone about. And because she was so convincing, so perfect, so good at making herself look like the victim, people would believe her. They always did. I sat there in that kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my mug, and I tried to figure out what to do. My first instinct was to call the police. But then I thought about the fact that Nola was currently not on the medication, and who knew what Brooke might do when she found out that Nola had talked to me, that the carefully constructed facade had been breached. I thought about the conservatorship that Brooke was apparently trying to establish. Legal guardianships and conservatorship were notoriously difficult to challenge once they were in place. Even with evidence of abuse, the court system was often slow and cumbersome and not always sympathetic to the victim. And what if Brooke had already talked to her lawyer? What if she had already started the legal process? What if I called the police and it went nowhere, and then Brooke used that failed intervention as evidence that I was paranoid and unstable? I couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not without more information. So instead, I did what any reasonable person would do when faced with a situation that seemed almost too surreal to be real. I started investigating. I started digging into my sister's life in a way that I probably shouldn't have, and I started uncovering things that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That first night, after Nola had finally fallen asleep, actually asleep, not drugged to sleep, which looked completely different now that I knew what to look for, I went into Brooke's study and started looking through her files. Her desk was obsessively organized, with labeled folders for everything from household expenses to medical records to legal documents. I found a folder labeled conservatorship, and inside were drafts of petitions, psychiatric evaluations that were clearly written by a doctor who was being paid to say what Brooke wanted him to say, and letters from Brooke's lawyer discussing strategy. One letter was particularly chilling. It discussed the importance of establishing a pattern of behavior that would justify the conservatorship in the eyes of the court. It suggested that Brooke needed to have documented incidents where Nola's inability to communicate was presented as a serious impediment to her functioning, incidents where her silence was portrayed not as a neutral difference, but as a disability that required intensive intervention and control. The letter went on to discuss how valuable it would be to have a concerned family member, like a well-meaning but ultimately unstable aunt, inadvertently demonstrate the dangers of allowing Nola to have unsupervised contact with people outside the home. It was like reading a script for a crime that had almost happened. That same night, I searched Brooke's medicine cabinet and found bottles of pills prescribed under her name that had never been mentioned to me. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and most tellingly, a prescription for the same antipsychotic that she had been giving to Nola. Her dosage was significantly higher than what she had been administering to my niece. This suggested to me that Brooke understood the drugs intimately, that she had been taking them herself, and that she had deliberately chosen to give them to Nola based on that knowledge. I also found several bottles of a medication I didn't recognize, so I looked it up on my phone. It was a sedative, something powerful enough to be used in medical settings. The prescription had been filled multiple times, and there were significantly fewer pills in the bottle than there should have been. I realized with horror that Brooke had probably been using this sedative on Nola, either hidden in her food or mixed with her water, to keep her docile and compliant. That night, I made copies of everything. I photographed every document, every prescription bottle, every piece of evidence. I stored the photos in a secure cloud account that Brooke would never have access to. I also documented the timestamp on each photo, creating a clear record of when and where I had found this information. I knew that if I was going to protect Nola, I would need evidence that was airtight, evidence that couldn't be disputed or challenged or explained away by a clever lawyer and a sister who was a masterful liar. The next morning, I woke Nola up at 6 o'clock and took her to get breakfast at a diner near the house. We drove separately so that if anyone checked Brooke's phone records or tried to track our movements, there would be a clear record that we had left the house together. At the diner, over pancakes and orange juice, I asked Nola to tell me more about the pills, about how long Brooke had been giving them to her, about whether anyone at her school had noticed anything unusual about her behavior. Nola told me that the medication had started about 18 months ago. Brooke had told her it was to help with anxiety, but Nola had quickly realized that it was making her feel worse, not better. She had started researching medication side effects online, using the school library computers where her mother couldn't monitor her browser history. That's when she had figured out what Brooke was actually doing. She had been medicating Nola into a state of functional incapacity, creating the very disability that she was then claiming justified the need for a conservatorship. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, a carefully constructed trap designed to trap my niece in her mother's legal and financial control for the rest of her life. Your mother, I said carefully, not wanting to poison Nola's relationship with her parent but also unable to sugarcoat what was happening, has been abusing you. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure it stops. Nola's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since she had spoken to me in the kitchen, she looked like the frightened child that she was. What if she finds out? Nola whispered. What if she comes back and finds out that I told you? What if she gets angry? This was the question that I had been dreading, because the honest answer was that we didn't know what Brooke would do if she discovered that her secret was out. We didn't know if she would try to take Nola and disappear, or if she would double down on the medication, or if she would try to retaliate against me in some way. But I couldn't let fear paralyze us. I reached across the table and took Nola's hand. I'm going to call someone, I said. I'm going to call a lawyer, and I'm going to call Child Protective Services. And I'm going to make sure that you are protected, no matter what happens. When Brooke and Mark returned from their cruise on Sunday evening, they found me and Nola waiting for them at the airport, along with 2 officers from the police department and a representative from the county's Child Protective Services. The look on Brooke's face when she saw us was something I will never forget. For just a moment, the mask slipped. For just a moment, I saw what was really underneath all that perfection and grace. I saw rage. I saw desperation. I saw the face of someone who had been caught in the act of committing something truly unforgivable. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the mask came back down. What is this? She asked, her voice rising in confusion and concern. Lisa, what have you told these people? Why are the police here? Nola, sweetheart, are you okay? She reached for her daughter, but the CPS representative stepped between them. What followed was a legal process that took months to resolve. Brooke's attorney fought viciously, challenging every piece of evidence, suggesting that I had planted the medications, that I was the one who was unstable and had been filling Nola's head with lies. But we had documentation. We had photographs. We had Nola's testimony. And most importantly, we had a medical evaluation of Nola conducted by a court-appointed pediatrician who immediately recognized the signs of medication abuse. The doctor testified that Nola's muted speech and listlessness were consistent with sedation and antipsychotic medication, not with any legitimate medical condition. By the end of the trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Brooke was charged with child abuse, fraud, and attempted elder fraud, the last charge relating to her plans to drug me. Her law license was suspended pending investigation. Mark, who turned out to have been largely in the dark about Brooke's activities, filed for divorce and agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. And Nola, my beautiful brave niece, was placed in my custody with the support of a court order that gave me the legal authority to make medical decisions on her behalf. The recovery process was slow. Nola had to be gradually weaned off the medications she had been taking, a process that required careful medical supervision and emotional support. She had to relearn how to trust adults, how to advocate for herself, how to believe that the world was a place where her voice mattered. She started attending therapy, real therapy with a therapist who specialized in trauma and abuse. And she continued to speak. Her voice grew stronger with each passing week until she could produce full sentences without the hoarseness that had characterized those first confessions. She told me about the years she had spent in her mother's home, years where she had been systematically drugged and controlled, years where her silence had been enforced not by her condition but by her mother's deliberate actions. She told me about the fear, the confusion, the sense that something was deeply wrong but being unable to articulate it or ask for help. She told me about listening to her mother make phone calls to lawyers and doctors, about slowly piecing together what was happening to her, about making the terrifying decision to try speaking, to break the silence that had defined her entire existence. Today, 2 years later, Nola is thriving. She is 15 years old, a freshman in high school, making friends, taking music lessons, and discovering who she is when she's free to be herself. She still has moments where she's quiet, but it's a chosen quietness, not an imposed one. And she is the most articulate, thoughtful, compassionate person I know. As for Brooke, she is currently serving a 12-year sentence in the Ohio Correctional Institution. She was convicted on all charges, and her sentence was enhanced due to the severity of the abuse and the premeditation involved. Mark married someone else and tries to have a limited relationship with Nola, though she has made it clear that she needs time before she can rebuild trust with him. And me? I've changed too. The experience of discovering that my sister was capable of something so horrifying, so calculated, so deeply wrong has fundamentally altered how I see the world. It's made me more cautious, but also more compassionate. It's taught me that evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a warning label. It shows up in perfect houses with perfect families and perfect exteriors, and it hides itself behind love and concern and family bonds. But it also taught me that there is goodness in the world too. There are people who listen to whispered warnings from traumatized children. There are doctors who recognize abuse when they see it. There are lawyers who fight for justice. There are therapists who help heal wounded souls. And there are nieces brave enough to speak up, even when speaking up is the scariest thing they've ever done. If you're still watching, comment, "I'm watching." Let's see who's paying attention. And if you know someone who might be in a situation like Nola's, if you suspect that a child in your life is being abused or medicated without proper justification, please reach out. Please call the authorities. Please believe them when they tell you something is wrong. Because silence is what allows monsters to thrive. And speaking up is what sets the innocent free.